Today I want to talk about corruption in our political system and some things that we could do to correct, bring about reform. There are plenty of problems in the executive branch, plenty of problems in the judicial branch. We have problems at the state level, local level, but I want to speak specifically about that area of politics that most people have some familiarity with, and that is the federal level politicians. Specifically, I want to speak about the legislative branch. That consists of two groups, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Members of the House are elected to terms of 2 years, and members of the Senate are elected to 6-year terms. Yet, we have a majority of people in the House of Representatives, congressmen, who have served for an average of 7 terms. That's 14 years. And it's even worse in the Senate. The average senator has been in power for 24 years. That's 4 terms. It equals nearly a quarter century. Most of the people who start out to seek elected office, they have some noble ambitions. In the beginning, they come out of their primary elections having played to those excitable fringes that they know will help them get elected. They come out of the primaries having worked primarily with the extremes, those that they can get agitated enough to really get behind them and work for their campaign. Of course, with the expectation that they're going to use their legislative powers to help reward those groups by helping to advance their agendas. But cycle after cycle, what we see is that once they get in there, get elected, and they talk about these noble things that they want to do, you always see the old dogs griping about the overzealousness of these fresh new pups that have joined Congress. We've got senior members like Harry Reid, the Senate Majority Leader, or on the other side of Mitch McConnell, the Minority Leader in the Senate, who look down their noses at these new people that have come to Washington, D.C. with designs like Mr. Smith, who went to Washington, going there with this idea that they're going to change things, they're going to fix the system. And so we have an outpouring of anger from these establishment party members toward the new people in Congress. But these congressmen, senators, once they hit the national level, clearly it's going to take more than 2 years, or in the case of senators, maybe 6 years, to get certain things passed that they seek. It's going to take millions of dollars for them to get reelected so that they can continue pursuing their ambitions to try and fix America. So you want to keep fighting, right? But the problem is those original people who first helped you get elected, they're no longer able to come up with the kind of money that you need to stay competitive at the federal level. Okay, the little people, they can't finance you anymore in the way that you need. So what happens? The congressman or the senator starts whining and dining with powerful big businesses and other influential parties. They start accepting junkets, which usually include being flown around the country or around the world in private jets to exotic places to research issues important to the new sponsors. Of course, these are just paid vacations, attempts at bribery that can legally be passed off as something else. But really, does anyone believe that oil companies give millions of dollars in PAC money, political action committee money, to the people in charge of making the laws that govern that company's ability to make a profit just because they want to be nice people? No, of course not. The companies are trying to buy favorable laws. That's just how capitalism works in a democracy. We, the people, rely on the honesty and the integrity of our legislators to keep them working for us. Yes, the little people, the common people. We can't come up with the money and keep putting a Mr. Smith goes to Washington type of person back into office once he's already there. So if his compliance can't be bought, the oil companies, for example, and I say oil company, but it could be any large company, pharmaceutical companies, it could be corporations of any kind. If those companies find that the compliance of the legislator cannot be bought, then what do? They give the money to a different candidate. So those that are in power know that it behooves them to work with these mega corporations and take their money, give them favors, and that way they tell themselves that they can continue helping out in what ways that they can on other issues. So the only way that our representatives can keep trying to fight for us, the little people, is to take money from big oil, banks, unions, political action committees, and in return fulfill favors for them. Okay, so after a few terms, the congressman is almost always compromised. They've been bought off. But after several terms, that congressman has become so powerful that he cannot be removed from office. He passes terrible laws on behalf of these corporations that hurt the little people, the citizens, these laws that favor their big money donors. The Congress becomes gridlocked, fighting with a lot of nastiness against each other, not for we the people, but for the big money interests that they serve. And here we are, still in the same position. We have no representation in government, not enough money to compete on the national playing field against these beasts, these mega corporations that have bribed away our legislators. So we start out with this great system, this great political system, but it's been twisted. It has been compromised. It's tragic. So we have to start all over from scratch, trying to find some legislator, or someone who's interested in running for office, who would be willing to represent our will, our needs as citizens, and trying to get them elected. Of course, now we've got to figure out how to get them elected over the previous person we had elected, who now has millions and millions of dollars in support behind them. So what's the solution? Well, first of all, the Founding Fathers, they saw this coming. They knew that these problems would arise, and so they wrote the Constitution in such a way that would help to balance out the powers of government so that these things would be less likely to happen. So what do? First of all, we should return to the original way that senators, U.S. senators, were put into office. They were not elected directly by the people. They were appointed by the government of the state from which they came. And it was not a direct election. Now, I won't take time to explain how perfect this was in balancing the powers between levels and branches of government, but I will say that it wasn't until fairly recently in our history that the U.S. Constitution was amended to create popular elections by the people. From 1789, when the Constitution was ratified, to 1913, we did it the old way. And 1913, for those of you who follow these things, you know that this was a terrible, terrible year. Lots of awful things happened in 1913. Great corruption. Well, from 1913 to the present, we have operated under the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. I'd say that history's proven which way is better, the original way. So we've got the 17th Amendment that created direct elections. What do about it? Well, I say we do the same thing that we did to the constitutional amendment that created prohibition. We repealed prohibition because it did not work. And we should repeal the amendment that created popular elections of senators. In one swift movement, the influence of money and special interests is virtually eliminated by that one corrective action. If senators are elected directly by the people, rather than being appointed by state governments, then the senators are subject to the same problem that the members of the House are, and that is they can be bought off by the corporations and special interests. That's why the founders did it this way. They did not want senators who were going to have terms that are 3 times as long as congressmen to be elected directly by the people. Next, we should take the House of Representatives and we should amend the Constitution to limit the number of terms for House members to 3 terms. That would be a maximum of 6 years that they could serve as a U.S. congressman. Very, very few politicians can make it longer than this, 6 years roughly, without becoming a special interest puppet. The writings of the Founding Fathers prove beyond any doubt that they envisioned a government run by citizen legislators, not by career politicians, which is what we have today. These people, if you look it up, you will find that nearly all of these people in Congress are millionaires. These are not citizen legislators. I don't rub elbows with millionaires on a daily basis. Maybe some of you do, but I think even those of you who do would agree that those are not the common people. We are supposed to have a government run by citizen legislators, not career politicians. The Supreme Court has already ruled that PAC money is a form of protected free speech. PAC money being that money that political action committees come up with. A political action committee is basically this. One company I worked for example, could not give money directly to a candidate, but they did have a political action committee. It was a group of employees and others affiliated with the company that were encouraged to donate money to it for the purpose of using that money to give as a lump sum to a congressman with the unspoken understanding that they would go to Washington, D.C. and pass laws that were favorable to our company. Okay, that has been ruled as free speech protected under the Constitution by the Supreme Court. So as much as people talk about campaign finance reform, there's only so much that we can do to get money out. The Supreme Court's already killed that. So what are we going to do to get money out of politics? What we have to do is change the way we think. Instead of getting money out of politics, we need to get the politicians away from the money. And that means we send them to Washington, D.C. with the knowledge that they are only going to be there for a short while. Since re-election then becomes far less important, they know the congressmen, for example, if they are going to be serving a maximum of 3 terms, then there's not a great motivation there to turn their attention from the little people that got them elected to the mega corporations, because the corporations are not needed. They can get in there for 2 or 3 terms without the big corporations. Same with the Senate. When the senators are put in there by the state governor, there's not as much control there of the corporations. There certainly would be some, and I do also favor a 2-term limit for U.S. senators. That's 12 years. I would say that's sufficient for any citizen to get in there and try and accomplish a certain goal. Well, since re-election becomes far less important, the legislator in this scenario would be more favorable toward helping the local level special interests. That would be me and you, less concerned with the wishes of these monolithic corporations. I do think there's still room for PAC reform, but I'd focus my efforts on these two things. One, repealing the 17th Amendment, and simultaneously doing number two, which is passing an amendment establishing congressional term limits. Until that day, we're going to continue being represented by crooks like Senator Harry Reid from Nevada, Senator John McCain from Arizona. We're going to have bums like Anthony Weiner of New York, who thankfully is gone now, but used his office to do some pretty crummy things. Newt Gingrich, we got rid of. These people should not be able to stay in office as long as they do. Goodness gracious, don't get me started on Senator Strom Thurmond, who was, goodness, how many terms? I can't even think of it off the top of my head. Decades the man was in there. Started out as a Democrat, found that it was eventually more in his interest because of changing demographics to become a Republican, which he did. I met him. I met Strom Thurmond. The year was 2000. I was at the time running the campaign for candidate Steve Forbes in North Carolina. And as such, because he didn't have a state representative or a state level manager in South Carolina, I was called on to go assist him down in South Carolina during the South Carolina presidential debate. And while there, as I was waiting, they had done put on a dinner for Strom Thurmond from South Carolina. And I met him as he was coming out the back exit. Here he is, short little man. He had one assistant on one side holding one arm, an assistant on the other side holding the other arm. And I walked up to him and said hello, and he smiled, and I'm not joking, he drooled. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even walk on his own. He was a walking vegetable. He was being controlled by the people behind him. And he remained in office for, another full term, another term and a half before he eventually died, I think in his 90s. That certainly was not a citizen legislator. Who knows who was actually controlling Strom Thurmond's votes? A very scary situation. Remember, diapers and politicians should be changed often, both for the same reason.